We finally have a bunch of performance benchmarks for the new M2 Pro and M2 Max MacBook Pros, and the results are very surprising. Now, when Apple announced these MacBooks, they showed off some performance numbers, and typically companies will try to inflate those numbers to make them seem as good as possible. That's great for marketing, makes sense, but Apple may have actually underestimated their performance results. Now, I'm gonna show you guys not only the CPU performance, also the graphics performance, and a few things that don't seem to line up, which we will talk about. Now, in our previous videos, we showed you guys the first leaked benchmarks that were really underwhelming, but then it got better when more tests came out. This, of course, was for the M2 Max, and we got a result of over 2,000 single core and 14,888 for multi-core. But now we are seeing even better multi-core scores of 15,373. Now, one thing that you have to remember is the M2 Pro and M2 Max have the same exact CPU layout, at least for the unbinned chip. So the performance should be the same, at least for simple tasks like this. We'll talk about tough tasks in just a second, but that gives us a 25% increase in performance, which is a lot better than we were expecting if Apple stuck with 5nm, which they did. Now, this is gonna make a big improvement for CPU-based tasks, which there are a lot of them, but unfortunately, with these new benchmarks, we do have a downside. But before I guys let you know about that, I have to tell you that we are doing a worldwide giveaway of a new MacBook Pro and a Mac Mini, and all you have to do is subscribe, enable notifications, and comment down below, which you could do on each of our new Mac videos, even the ones released previously, to get more chances to win. We'll be choosing the winner live on February 1st, so don't miss that video. Now, these new chips have great multi-core performance, but what's surprising is that the single core actually went down on these new tests. Instead of having over 2,000, we're now looking at about 1965 in general, which does line up with the regular M2 chip. Now, why would that happen? If we go ahead and scroll down here, you will see that we are seeing a base frequency of 3.49 gigahertz compared to 3.68 on the previous tests. Now, there could be a couple things going on. The 3.68 gigahertz we only saw on the 16-inch MacBooks with the M1 Max, but the 14-inch models did not show that. So far with Apple Silicon MacBooks, the frequencies have been the same, but there's a chance Apple could allow the 16-inch to clock higher because it has better cooling. Now, we also have the high performance, high power mode, so it could be because of that if it is toggled, or simply because this is on beta software. So we're gonna have to see what the clock speeds are, and we will compare the 14-inch and 16-inch because we ordered a ton of these things. So if you guys wanna see real world performance benchmarks, make sure you guys also have those notifications enabled. Now, the $2,000 14-inch MacBook Pro, which a lot of people buy and we recommend, has a binned M2 Pro chip, and thankfully we now have the performance numbers for that. There is a range of scores, but we do have some that are over 12,000 for multi-core, which means that even if you buy the cheapest version with the bin 10-core CPU instead of 12, you are getting close to the score of an M1 Max 16-inch expensive laptop, now at the very base level, which is really sweet. Now, as for longer, tougher tasks where you can have throttling, we now have scores for Cinebnech, and I want to start out with the base bin model for $2,000. That's a 14-inch, and here we're seeing 12,489 for Cinebnech multi-core. The crazy thing is, that is exactly the score that we got with the 16-inch M1 Max. The performance is identical, and that is a very nice boost. Now, if we're comparing the unbinned version, for example, a 16-inch model, now we have 15,529. That is once again a 25% improvement compared to the M1 Pro that's unbinned or the M1 Max. That is a nice gain year over year. Now, the question is, how hot will these machines get, and after 10 or 20 minutes, will it throttle down? Because we know with the M2 chip, we had about a 30% or 33% gain in wattage in order to get that performance boost, which with that was actually only 13. So we are gonna test that out hands-on. Now, one thing I have to remind you guys is that these raw benchmark performance don't always translate to real world, because many times there's other improvements that can make real world performance much better. And Vadim did a deep dive into these new chips, covering a lot of improvements that will affect day-to-day use. So even though this is still 5 nanometer, we might see some really nice gains. Now, where it gets really interesting is graphics, and we have multiple different benchmarks. I'm gonna start out with Geekbench because we now have the performance for both the M1 Pro and the M1 Max. Now here's our score for the M1 Pro. This is for the unbinned model with 19 GPU cores. We don't yet have the base $2,000 one available, but this one gets 52,691, which is 33% better than the 39,687 that we had with the unbinned M1 Pro. So that is once again a nice gain. But what's even more interesting is that the 24-core M1 Max scored 59,345. So the M2 Pro is getting close to an M1 Max. Now the M2 Max, on the other hand, with the full amount of cores, scores 86,805. Now the best score that we got with M1 Max was 68,230. So if we do the math, the M2 Max is 27% faster. Now, that is actually lower than what Apple quoted for the GPU improvements, but what you have to remember is that Geekbench does not scale properly and doesn't actually test these chips properly because things happen so fast that the full performance does not kick in, and they're not acknowledging that they need to change anything, but we also have performance from other tests. But first, I want to talk about the Mac Studio, because the M1 Ultra, that scored 94,583, and the score of 86,805 for the M2 Max is also getting dangerously close in a laptop, not a desktop Mac. Now the other graphics benchmark performance that we got was GFX Bench, which does scale very well, and we have both the M2 Pro and M2 Max. So starting out with the M2 Pro, looking at Aztec Ruins high tier, we have 209.8 FPS compared to 163.5 for the M1 Pro. Now, that is an improvement of 27%. That seems a little bit low. And if we look at Manhattan off screen, we have 349.4 compared to 272, also roughly 27-28%. Now, this was very weird because when we go and take a look at the M2 Max performance compared to the M1 Max, the difference is startling. For Aztec Ruins, we have 398.5 FPS compared to 281.6, and that is a difference of around 42%. And then if we take a look at the tougher test, which is Manhattan, we have 669.6 FPS compared to 435, and that is a difference of 54% improvement with the new M2 Max. So my guess is that our first test with the M2 Pro, that could just be a binned version compared to unbinned with the M1 Pro. And if that is the case, that means that the cheapest version of the M2 Pro could beat out the better version of the M1 Pro. And if we compare the M2 Max compared to M1 Max, the scaling works out really well. So if your program is optimized well for metal, we can have improvements of over 50%. Now, how is that the case if Apple gave us much lower numbers? Well, we previously showed off that the M1 Max had scaling issues because of TLB memory not having enough, especially for higher resolution things, and scaling was an issue. But with this new chip, people are already talking about how that was fixed. There's a lot more buffer. The TLB issue has been greatly improved. And that means that not just looking at the raw numbers, but actual real world performance for higher resolution tasks especially can be much better because that bottleneck can be now removed. And what's absolutely mind-blowing is that if we compare it to the Mac Studio with the M1 Ultra, which is very expensive, you'll see that the M2 Max gets very close in performance with proper metal scaling. We're talking about almost identical. And in the tests that are CPU limited, for example, the lower resolution ones, we have 662 FPS for the M1 Ultra and 962 for the M1 Max. It is smoking it. And the same thing for Manhattan here. We have 1700 FPS compared to 1184 with the CPU and the GPU both being used. And for a lot of tests, for example, when we're running raw codecs, both of those are being used. So these machines could actually be a really big improvement, especially with that TLB memory issue fixed. You guys let me know your thoughts. Is this a big enough upgrade? If you guys want to pick one of these up, you can use the YouTube shopping feature. These laptops will be linked below. And make sure you guys subscribe and comment on this video and the previous ones to get more entries. And check out Vadim's deep dive into these new M2 Pro and M2 Max chips. This is Max, and I'll see you in the next one.